Welcome to Mac Talk, a Middle Tennessee podcast from Monthaven Arts and Cultural Center in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Centerpoint Wine and Liquor. That's in Hendersonville, Tennessee. I'm your announcer, Jim Black. Well, if you've ever had kids or grandkids, then you know how important a great illustrated book can be. Titles like Curious George and Where the Wild Things Are can really spark a child's imagination. Have you ever wondered how these books are created? In the best books, there's a perfect marriage of story and illustration. Today's guest is an expert on this subject. He's the Nashville-based artist Michael McBride. Michael has illustrated more than 80 children's books over the course of his career. He currently has an exhibit at Monthaven called Color, Culture, and Children. This features illustrations from 3 of his latest books. Michael is here today to talk and speak with MAC's Chief Operating Officer, John Pitcher. They're going to talk about the fine art of illustrating children's books. John, take it away.
Thank you, Jim and Michael McBride. Welcome to Mac Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Well, you are a professor at Tennessee State University. You're a well-known studio artist. You have painted some well-known murals. And I'm just wondering, how did you become an artist? When did you first pick up a paintbrush?
Well, at the age of 8, I told my parents I was going to be an artist. And coming from rural West Tennessee, I was not exposed to art until my freshman year of college. So I didn't have it in high school, middle school, any of that. But I knew that I was going to be an artist. And so my first exposure to it was 1975 when I went to college in St. Louis. And I wanted to be a commercial artist, illustrator. And that was my goal. I had seen illustrations by great African-American illustrators, Tom Fillings, back in the early 70s, and Jerry Pickney and all of those people. And I saw the work on Good Times and Ernie Barnes and all that. And so my whole aspiration was that, that's what I want to do one day. So
that's how it happened. Well, I know a lot of artists who have a specialty. They do watercolor and they do it really well, or they do metal art, or they do oil.
Right.
What is Michael McBride stock in trade? Because I seem to think of you of doing just about everything.
I'm very versatile in what I do, in terms of different mediums and all of that. And one of the reasons for that is that I think you can learn something from each medium that you can carry over to the next one. And I don't want to be bored, so I'm constantly doing things. And a lot of ideas that you have work best in certain mediums. They don't always work in one medium. And you will see that artists will always paint. And when one of the ideas would have been better as a sculpture, one idea might have been better as a block print, one idea might have been better as a drawing, would make the idea even more powerful. So that's what I do. I decide on, when I have an idea, I decide on which is going to be the best medium to use it to make it the most powerful.
Okay.
In terms of that.
Right. Well, I asked the opera singer Renee Fleming once about what is her style. Tell me what your style is, because she'll do an opera one year and she'll be doing jazz the next year. And she says, versatility is my style.
Right. That's exactly.
And I think that's how I think about you.
You're right. That's a very good point. I'm glad to get that. So now I can say.
Now you can say
what's my style? Versatility is my style. I like that.
So cool. Well, you are certainly a great illustrator. You have, as I understand, illustrated over 80 children's books.
Over 80 children's books.
You have a exhibit now at Monthaven Arts and Cultural Center that's running through March 24th. It's called Culture, Color, and Children, and it's illustrations of yours of 3 books.
Right.
And before we dig into those books, let me ask you, because I know a lot of people are going to want to know this.
Okay.
Because there are so many people out there who want to write a children's book. There's so many people out there who want to illustrate a children's book.
Right.
How do you get into that?
Well, with technology now, you can self-publish, and you can put stuff online. You can put stuff on Instagram. You can advertise yourself as an illustrator on Instagram, show samples of your work. You can do it on Facebook. Technology has really changed the game a lot in art and in music and a lot of things in doing that. And I think that's one of the best ways to do it, is to introduce yourself. Now, there's a organization called Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. It's been around a long time. You can actually submit to that and put up an artist page in that. And this is a worldwide organization. So, that's one way. As a matter of fact, one of the books that I did, the publishing company that I did the Helen LaFrance book that's at the show, that's how they found me the first time. They were looking for a particular artist for the first book, which was Ellis Wilson, which we did last year. And they saw a lot of different artists' work, but they were looking for a particular artist that they felt would bring that to life. And they saw my work, and they called me to set up a Zoom to see if I would be interested in illustrating.
Okay.
And so, so that's how that happened. That's how they found me.
Okay. Well, that's a great way to dig into that book, because I found that book to be, I loved all these books, but I found the Helen LaFrance book. It's She Remembered It All, The Memory Art of Helen LaFrance by Jane Moore Waldrop and Michael McBride. Tell us a little bit about Helen LaFrance.
So I got exposed to Helen LaFrance back in around 1977, 78, when I transferred to Tennessee State University. And I knew about the Stieglitz collection, which one of her pieces in the Stieglitz
That's
collection.
over at Fisk, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Fisk
And
University,
so
Stieglitz
I knew
collection.
about her along with Horace Pippin, a lot of naive artists, especially African American artists, that did work. So that was, and Ellis Wilson also. I was introduced to all of them being there. So you learn a lot at Historical Black College. You learn a lot about African American artists, from the naive artists to the academically trained artists and all this. And Helen LaFrance was a memory painter. So Helen is kind of in the mind of William Edmondson. William Edmondson, he sculpted based off, he had visions. Mm-hmm. Visions that he had. He called them heavenly visions. He really did. And images came from that. Helen LaFrance she could look at something and she takes in everything, and she didn't have to look at it to paint it. She noticed everything, and she could go back.
Did she have like a photographic memory?
Yeah, she could go back and paint it. Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Wow.
And she could, because
that is amazing.
Well, what's so cool is that a few moments ago I met this couple in there, and they own a Helen LaFrance, and the husband bought it because he grew up in rural Kentucky.
And she's from Kentucky,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
And then he was talking to the lady he went up to visit. He met Helen, went up to visit, stopped in the flower shop, asked for, get flowers because he knew she liked flowers, he had heard. And the lady at the flower shop said, "Oh, yeah, I know her," said, "She painted our house," and said she came and spent about 15 minutes, looked at our house and everything, and we didn't hear from her for a long time. When she came back, she had painted the house with everything that she saw.
That's a kind of crazy genius
Exactly.
when you think about it.
Exactly.
There's just very few
Yes,
people who can
very
do
few
that.
people that can do that.
Wow.
And so one of the things that, and speaking of that, is that it's like me. I can draw anything. You can tell me to draw something. If I have seen it, I can draw it. I don't have to look at it and draw it.
Okay.
It can be an anteater. It can be an ant. It can be a bug, beetle, whatever it is. It can be an elephant. I ask you which one, African or Indian elephant, which one, I mean, it's learning to be what I call a term I tell my students, become visually intellectual.
Okay. So, because those are very specific, big details when you're becoming intellectual, right? The African elephants
visual,
have the big ears.
You
the
become
Indian
visually
elephants have the
intellectual,
small
right?
ears, and that's something you got to know about.
You got to know about, and that is because you're learning to really see, and that's what Helen was able to do.
Okay.
is really see.
Let me ask you a little bit about process, because I know people listening to this are they're gonna really want to know all about that.
Right.
And I know there's no one process, but when you're talking specifically about an important artist like Helen LaFrance, who's a folk artist,
Right.
sorts.
Nave folk artist.
Does her style, does her approach, does that influence your thinking about how you're going to illustrate a book about her? Or are you doing it your own way? How does that work?
Well, this was... So when I did Helen LaFrance Memory Painter, it was about what I understood and knew about her. And so I couldn't do her pieces or do pieces in her style, because now you're getting into kind of a copyright situation.
Right.
So what I did was, from my point of view, I thought about what she actually would see, and I drew it more realistically.
Oh, okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
So if she's talking about downtown, I was doing my research, downtown Mayfield. You know, I saw images of downtown Mayfield during the 20s and 30s, you know, what it looked like. And so that's what I drew, not in her style, but I drew it more in mine. So those are the things.
So you're being an illustrator, you're illustrating her story.
Yes,
and
I'm
not
illustrating
trying
her
to
story,
copy
not
her
trying to
style.
copy her style.
Excellent. So that makes a lot of sense. So that's something, you know, people who might be interested in illustrating, something they'd want to know. Don't be a copycat.
Yeah, just do things in your style. Because what I did with the Ellis Wilson book, which was, you know, different, is that there was no copyrights on his images. So I drew images. I didn't try to draw Ellis Wilson himself, but I came up with an image, and I had this image painting some of Ellis Wilson's paintings, you know, in doing that. So we were able to do that and not get into a copyright situation.
Okay. Well, you just completed a master class this morning over at Monthaven, and there are a lot of people in there who want to know how to do what you do.
Right.
And they were, of course, asking you about your process.
Right.
And we were talking a little bit about that earlier, and I thought it was fascinating. Could you talk about that some more? You know, because you teach students how to do this.
Right.
So how do we teach people to do book illustration?
Okay. So what I do in my illustration class is, the first thing I do is that I need to open up the imagination. What I tell my students in illustration, what I tell anybody, you're only limited to your imagination.
Okay.
Illustration is probably the only class or only thing that you would do that you're only limited to your imagination, because painting, you're limited to a certain degree because of the medium, you know, all different things. But with illustration, you can illustrate with anything. So you're not limited to your imagination.
Right.
So, I mean, you're only limited to your imagination. So what I do is that I have a first project called Creativity with my students, and it is creating art from everyday objects. So now it's forcing them to look at everyday objects, I mean, the simplest of everyday objects, and to create a drawing utilizing that object in the drawing. So it's like using a collage along with a drawing to create that. And that's probably the hardest thing that they have to do in the beginning, to open up the imagination. So once you have opened that door to imagination and creativity, then everything else is wide open. You know, you look through a different lens.
Well, one example you gave was the broken pencil.
Yeah.
Tell me about that one again.
So the broken pencil,
so
I showed them where, you know, I told them you can take a broken pencil and break it in half, get a piece of paper, draw a person or a kid or whatever it is, chopping it like they're breaking it in half with their hand, and you glue it down, and it looks like they've broken that pencil with their hand. You know, it's just that simple.
So you're teaching them how to turn on their imagination.
Yes.
Kind of like a light switch. And you can learn how to do that.
You can learn how to do that.
Yeah.
You can learn how to do that. And that's all part of being visually intellectual, because you look at something and you can see something. And you think about it, we do it as children when we look up in the sky at the clouds and go, oh, that looks like an elephant. Ooh, we are creating. You see what I'm saying? We're actually looking at the clouds and creating formation of things that we actually see, or that it actually looks like. And so, but we stop it there. We don't think about taking that further.
Right.
You know.
Well, speaking of people who are interested in doing an illustrated children's book, I have to now talk about what I think might well be my favorite illustrated children's book of all time, and that's Dr. Gary's book, S is for Sweetgrass, the ABCs of Gullah Geechee.
Yes.
I should just add that Dr. Gary, she is a specialist in this this field,
oh, yes,
right?
She is.
So, I mean, she understands this, and she's written her doctorate on it.
Yes.
So for all of you folks out there who've, written your pointy-headed doctorate, with all the, Chicago Manual of Style footnotes or MLA footnotes or everything else, there is a creative way for you to deal with this as well. And in an imaginative way. And that's what Dr. Gary did. She actually explored Gullah Geechee culture through the eyes of some children riding to their grandma's house or great grandma's house. They were playing a game, the ABC game. The ABC game, So let me ask you, because that is obviously, you've really got to use your imagination to come up with ideas for that. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with this writer, this person, and this project.
This writer, she at the time she was at Tennessee State University. She was working there, and she had written a dissertation on this, and she wanted to do a children's book. And someone told her, to come over to the art department and meet me. And so we met, and because she wasn't sure whether I would want to do it or not, So she met me, and we talked about it. And I told her, I said, I have kind of a kinship. My grandfather was Geechee. So
tell us a little bit about this culture, a little bit too, the Gullah Geechee.
So this Geechee and Gullah, the Geechee culture is like South Carolina, Charleston, Low Country, in parts of North Carolina. And these are people basically from West Africa, that slaves that were brought over. And so a lot of the things the foods and stuff like okra and yams and indigo plant and rice and all that came over with these people. Because over in that Low Country, you got to figure out what you could grow, with that. And so all of that happened. And so my grandfather, his father was from that area, and they relocated. He was 9. So my great-grandfather was 9 when he was given as a wedding gift to the McBride daughter and her husband, and they moved from North Carolina to Madison County in West Tennessee.
Okay.
And that's how my great-grandfather got there. So my grandfather, his child, and so, so that's how that Geechee.
So you were already fascinated.
Very fascinated with it. Just the whole thing, the history of it, the tradition. So over in that area, they still have a lot of traditions, African traditions that they kept. And so people go there and visit all the time. It's a huge tourist thing because you go there and you see all this wonderful, heritage that's still being used.
Yeah.
Over there.
Well, what I found so fascinating about this book is it's a very specific culture, but I was just reminded of how much American culture is a fusion culture.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, a lot of just what we consider to be American food is West African that has become American
that
food.
Has become Americanized as food. And Southern, we have it as Southern, know.
Some of the most, the most important influential music in the world is West African music that has fused with every other kind of music you can find here, whether it's country or rock or rockabilly or whatever. And it's now it's a world music.
Yeah, the instrument, the banjo, which is
that is an African instrument.
Yes, exactly. And the zizi, which is for Z, that particular instrument is kind of based off what the banjo
Right.
It's based off of, yeah.
Well, what I also loved, I mean, and of course, heritage,
Yes.
is in here, is very important. But
Right.
what I found fascinating about this book is, E is for estuaries.
Yes.
And this professor, this writer, is able to incorporate, I mean, everything from food to music to fashion to environmental issues.
Right. Absolutely.
So it is an amazing, and it's done in a very sweet, creative way.
Oh, absolutely. It's done in a marvelous way. And so illustrating that was a thing. I mean, doing my research and looking at the estuaries, just all of the culture of the marshland and just all of that. How do you make that an illustration that someone would be interested, in seeing and the beauty of it? And that's the thing. Instead of just, it's just, the marshland and stuff, but it's really composing and really creating something, a picture that you could look at, and still feel something from it, instead of just saying, just a picture.
Yeah.
And it was a great book. And one of the things that I told her, it was about a year and a half of illustrating. And I said to her, be patient. I said, because you're going to love what happens at the end and all that, because I had the vision of what it was going to look like.
Right.
And that's what I was doing, creating the vision.
Wow. And one thing I've noticed about your illustrations is that, just like the writer, you're a storyteller.
Yes.
So you're having to think about that.
You got expressions, you got facial expressions, you got hand gestures, you got all of that. And my whole thing is that I always, they were asking me today in the class about how I go about it. I said, well, my process is that, first of all, I view the book like a movie. Mm-hmm. I said, when I read the script, I'm thinking about a movie. So when I read the script and there's a line or a passage in there, I think about, okay, what time of day is it? What is the weather like? Is it wintertime, summertime? What are the people involved? Are they happy, sad? Are they smiling? Are they, it's that whole thing. So if I'm looking at a movie, what is this scene?
Wow.
What all is in this scene?
So you're in some ways creating your storyboards for your movie.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's the way I look at it. So a movie has to move through. So when I'm choosing what I'm illustrating, it has to make sense from one illustration to the next. It just can't be, this is an illustration, that's an illustration. It has to move like a movie. This illustration makes sense when you see the second illustration. Right. It makes sense when you see the third illustration.
And that's the sense I had when I was saying you're a storyteller. I felt like, this illustration here would not have occurred to me or seemed logical if I hadn't seen the two or three that came before it.
There you go. That is
so fascinating.
And that's the way it works.
Wow. Well, and now there's another book here. It's called, and this is very different from the others, it's called Tickle Me Grandma.
Right.
It's by Delphine Pierce. This is a very, very sweet book about the relationship of an autistic boy named Caleb and his grandmother.
Right.
I love the story. I have to ask you, what interested you in this?
Well, what interested me is that I was contacted by Delphine. She was recommended me by my cousin, who's a friend of hers, and because she had this book. What Delphine has worked and volunteered with Easter Seals before and all this, and Delphine's thing is that she wanted people to understand that kids with autism can kind of enjoy life the way regular kids would enjoy life. And she wanted to tell her son Caleb's story, because she said, I've taken Caleb overseas, on vacation. He loves swimming, just all of these things that, in other words, trying to do normal kids, stuff that he's got that. And she wanted to get that story out, his story and his life out, to, people to do that. And she said to me that when she was there for the book signing, she said, I was so happy. Because people came up to me and said, we're so glad you did this book, because I have a grandson, I have a nephew that, open that door, to people that, autistic kids, they, I mean, they're the same. They enjoy those things, you know.
Tell me about your process with that book, because that book struck me as a little different from the
That
others.
book, she sent me pictures of Caleb doing things. We talked about Caleb. She told me stories about Caleb and things. So I really got a chance to understand who Caleb was. Mm-hmm. So as I'm illustrating the book, because I know what she had told me about Caleb, when I'm illustrating a scene or whatever it is, I'm thinking about how Caleb would, approach that. What would be his reactions, or what would be his mannerism, what would be all of these things. So that's really how that happens. When I read a script, that's what I do. I try to place myself in the characters, and as much that's why I love working directly with authors, because together, jointly, we can put together a good book, because I'm really learning about the characters and the people that I'm actually illustrating.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have at Monthaven this summer, we have the artwork of a man who's best known as a lyric writer, Bernie Taupin. He wrote the lyrics for Elton John. And as I was reading through these books that you've done, I was kind of thinking of words and music.
Yeah.
That they really go together like a song.
They do. They do.
And they really have to complement. You have to really complement each other. You really have to be bringing out the emotions in the words in a way that people can really see it. And I could see that with Caleb, because he just seems so joyful when his grandma would touch him or hug him. Or tickle
Exactly.
him.
Exactly.
And that's the thing we want to see.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that. And the thing that I've seen children's book, I've illustrated my first children's book in 1982. So I've seen a lot of children's books, and the thing that I find that happens a lot of times, that 95% of the time, I would say illustrators and authors never know each other. They never meet each other. Mm-hmm. Okay,
and that's so there's no relationship, right?
There's no relationship. So you can get books that are beautifully illustrated but very sterile. They don't move you in any kind of way. They're just pretty, but they don't move you in terms of that. You don't get involved in it, know. And a lot of times that happens because if the illustrator has no kind of emotional attachment in any kind of way to that story or that author, then it shows up in the work.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've talked about that once before. I think you have said that you really prefer the freelance approach to this, because you want to have a connection with your author.
Absolutely. And
as opposed to working at the big publishing house, which I think a lot of people might see as the destination.
Right.
That's your success. You're the big publishing house.
Yeah.
That's actually, in some ways, it's almost more like factory work.
It is. You're cranking it out. The people come, we want you to illustrate this book. You get it. You're cranking it out. I mean, it's like assembly line in a sense. You're cranking it out.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I've only been with 2 galleries in my professional career. One was out in California, and one was in New Orleans. Those are the only 2 galleries I ever been with. But I never really sought galleries, trying to do that, because I like the freedom of, being able to change and do what I need to do, and if I want to do something different. I remember talking with the great Red Grooms. He had a show at Cheekwood, and he was in town, and we were standing talking, and he said to me, he said, I really don't like galleries. He said, because they don't allow you to change and explore. They want you to keep doing what they're selling.
Right.
And he said, but I'm in it because, he's one of the world-renowned artists, so he's part of the stable of something. So now you got yourself kind of locked in, to that contractual and a whole bunch of other things. And so I saw that early on in my career. I never wanted to be locked in like that. I like the freedom to be able to change and try new things and not worry about saying, oh, well, you can't do that because we can't sell it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't,
So you do it your way and it works.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it has.
Well, I need to ask you about a couple of other things that go a little bit above and beyond the show you have on right now because they're just so fascinating.
Well, thank you.
But you have painted in downtown Nashville a very important mural for John Lewis,
Right. Good trouble.
The late congressman. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that, because most particularly, it's first of all, it's just an incredibly amazing and wonderful and important work for the city of Nashville. But people might need to be reminded that John Lewis had an important connection to Nashville.
Yes. Oh, yes. John Lewis was great. He graduated from Fisk University, then American Baptist. And the mural is about his time here in Nashville. How important that time was. That was during the move of the sit-ins and the march on, Selma and just all of those things. And he was very, very important from the standpoint is that out of all the things that he went through and everything, he never had animosity. If you ever known anything about him, he was always trying to compromise and do things, trying to do what's right. And like he said, good trouble. And that's what that was. You're trying to do something right, and that's what the good trouble was. Wasn't doing something bad, It was that. And so I was very honored to do that because also, number one, he's my fraternity brother. And I was just honored to be able to do that. But I was not the initial artist on that mural. I was contacted and called in because the first group of artists, it didn't work out.
Okay.
And so they called me.
Just like you are the professional illustrator, so if someone needs to finally get a job done,
right,
call Michael McBride.
And that has happened.
Okay,
that has happened in illustration also.
Yeah, you got the track record. Well, another one that I want to ask you about is a series you've done that I know has been touring. It's Too Black, Too Fast.
Yes,
about the jockeys.
Yeah,
and to me, we've chatted about this here and there because I think you've got a Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks blockbuster idea here. And it's the kind of story I think writers like an Eric Larson, who did Isaac's story, likes to find the great historical stories that maybe have been overlooked a bit.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about your interest in the 18th, 19th century black jockeys.
Yeah. So around 1991. I had an artist friend, a place called Kivalon Images, which is down 28th, which is downtown from Tennessee State down the street. And a friend of mine, Yusef Hass, was the founder of that. And he contacted me because he knew I did stuff on the Buffalo Soldiers. I was his history buff. Mm-hmm. And he asked me if I had anything on black jockeys. And I go like, black jockeys? He said, yeah. He said he was contacted by Churchill Downs to see if he had any books or anything on black jockeys. And so I said, no, man, I don't know anything about black jockeys. So I went to the library. And so people said, well, why didn't you get on the internet? This is 1991.
That's right.
That's what I told them. The internet wasn't really invented in 1995, 96, right?
2 years old. One of the guys in the military.
Right. And so I went to the library, and I went to the section on horse racing, and the first book I ran across was Race Line. And so I'm looking through Race Line, going through, and then I get to the end of the book, toward the middle to the back of the book, and it had Black Kings. That's the Black Kings, and that's when it told me all about black jockeys. And then I just got immersed into it, man. And then I ran across a book called Great Black Jockeys by Ed Holtland, the book that he wrote. And so I just got to going and researching and got to doing everything. And so at that time I said, well, I can do paintings, because that's all I was thinking about at the time. And then I got with a former partner of mine and shared it with him, and we finally came up and said, this is more than just an exhibition. It's more like a multimedia, thing. And so we spent a year putting together a whole multimedia thing with all the things we expected. And as a matter of fact, we were so far ahead of what the internet was going to do and all of this. So we had all these things in play, and as technology changed, we just plugged it in. We always knew what we wanted, but we needed technology to catch up with us.
Right.
And so it just fascinated people, all the stuff that we were doing, because they thought that we had just come up with stuff. But if you saw our business plan, all that stuff was put together way back in 2005.
Well, I find it fascinating because, America is very much a sports crazy country.
Oh, yes.
It's like Super Bowl Sunday is practically a national holiday.
Right.
And
exactly.
What most of us don't realize is that, before you had Babe Ruth, before you had the NFL, in the 19th century, the biggest superstars in sports were these black jockeys.
Black jockeys, yeah, 1619. So the horses, a lot of the horses came over with the Middle Passages. You always show pictures of the slaves and stuff in ships, but you didn't realize they also brought horses, because a lot of the slaves of West Africa, they were what we call horse whisperers, like a Native American.
Right.
They were expert horse people. And Belle Meade in Nashville, most of their slaves had to do somewhat with the horse racing industry, whether it was leather work, metal work, all of that. It was for that industry.
Okay. Yeah. So I can't wait to see more of what you guys come up with on this, because it's just it's fascinating history.
Well, the thing I just discovered last year, I knew of one black female jockey, and Cheryl White, and she was on the cover of Jet magazine in 1972 at 16. As a female jockey, but I knew there had to be other female jockeys prior to her. And just last year, I went back on the internet trolling again. I found two black female jockeys. One born in 1855, and I think the other one was born in 1919, maybe, or something like that. And so Eliza Carpenter, that was born in 1855, and Cheryl Rideout Bishop was born, and Sylvia Rideout Bishop was born, I think, in 1919 or somewhere like that. But yeah, they were black jockeys, and so I finally painted portraits of them. So they haven't. It hadn't been. 9 new portraits I've done that haven't been introduced yet.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
All right. Well, Michael McBride, you have a Color, Culture, and Children exhibit at Monthaven Arts and Cultural Center through March 24th. People who are interested in coming out and seeing this really, really amazing show can go to monthavenarts.org for some more information. Michael, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
All right.
You've been listening to Mac Talk, a Middle Tennessee podcast from Monthaven Arts and Cultural Center in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Today's episode was brought to you by Centerpoint Wines and Liquors. Our guest today was artist Michael McBride. His exhibit of book illustrations called Color, Culture, and Children is currently on display at Monthaven Arts and Cultural Center through March 24th. Our podcast music was written by Nashville composer Christina Spinay. Our producer is Jonah Pitcher. I'm your announcer, Jim Black, and we'll see you next time.